Walk into a grocery store and head straight for the baking aisle, because this is one of the most misleading simple sections in the entire supermarket. Flour looks innocent. It looks old-fashioned. It looks like one of the last foods on earth that should be uncomplicated. Wheat, ground up, bagged, done. But then you start looking closer, and the illusion begins to crack. Some bags sell nostalgia. Some sell budget convenience. Some sell Southern baking romance. Some sell the idea that if your grandmother used it, it must be the safe choice. And that is exactly why this category catches people off guard. Most shoppers do not walk up to a bag of flour expecting to make a risk calculation. They think they are making the most basic purchase in the store. In reality, they are often choosing between degrees of processing, degrees of transparency, and degrees of trust. And before we go any further, this is not a panic video, and it is not a recall list. These bags are sold legally every day. The real issue is different. If your goal is to buy the cleanest, least chemically manipulated, most transparent all-purpose flour you can realistically find in the United States, a lot of the most familiar bags are not where I would start. Some are bleached, some are enriched after processing, some tell a comforting story on the front and reveal a more industrial product on the back, and some are only safe if your definition of safe is common, not carefully chosen. So picture the scene. You are standing in the aisle with a cart that already has eggs, butter, maybe vanilla, maybe a bag of chocolate chips. You are not trying to become a flour historian. You just need a bag for pancakes, cookies, biscuits, bread, maybe a birthday cake next weekend. You look for the familiar names, the low prices, the nice packaging, the bag your mother bought, the one on sale, the one that says all-purpose like it can do everything with no downside. That is the exact moment this category starts steering you instead of serving you. The first bag I would leave on the shelf is Pillsbury Best All-Purpose Flour. This is one of those brands that wins immediately on recognition. The logo is familiar, the price is usually manageable, and the whole thing feels safe because it feels normal. But normal is doing a lot of work here. The common all-purpose version is an enriched bleached wheat flour. That matters because the front gives you the feeling of pantry reliability, while the actual product is a more processed flour than many shoppers realize they are buying. Bleaching is part of how the flour gets that bright, clean, supermarket white look. Then enrichment brings vitamins back in. That does not automatically make it the worst product on earth. But if you thought you were buying a plain, minimally handled flour, you were not. You were buying a flour that has already gone through more intervention than the bag's simple image suggests. In this aisle, that gap between image and reality matters. A few feet away, the next one I would pass is Gold Medal All-Purpose Flour, the standard white bag version. This is another classic. It has been in American kitchens forever, and that history gives it enormous shelf authority. But the standard version is also a bleached flour with added enrichment. And this is where buyers get trapped by legacy. They assume a long reputation means the product is closer to the old-school ideal. A lot of the time, it just means the product is better at surviving across decades of mass retail. Gold Medal performs well for a lot of home bakers, and that is exactly what makes it tricky. Performance and transparency are not the same thing. A bag can bake fine and still not be the bag you should choose if your priority is a simpler, less manipulated flour. This is the flour aisle's oldest trick. Functionality becomes a substitute for scrutiny. Now keep moving, because the third bag people grab for comfort is White Lily. And White Lily has a very specific emotional pull. It is not just flour, it is identity. It is soft biscuits, old recipes, southern kitchens, family tables, and that powdery, feather-light promise that feels almost impossible to criticize without sounding sacrilegious. But here is the problem. The familiar all-purpose White Lily bag is also an enriched bleached flour. The brand emphasizes softness and texture, and that is part of why people love it. It is milled from soft winter wheat and built for a particular baking experience. But from a shopper standpoint, that beloved softness is not the same thing as a clean label win. If your goal is the most reassuring choice for ingredient simplicity and processing restraint, White Lily is selling you performance nostalgia, not maximum clarity. It may make a fluffy biscuit. That does not mean it is the safest or most transparent bag in the aisle. And right next to that emotional comfort zone is another bag that survives on familiarity, Martha White. This is the fourth one I would skip. Again, the branding is humble, homey, dependable. It feels like the kind of flour that could never be controversial because it never tried to be modern. But that is exactly why people don't examine it. The all-purpose version is an enriched bleached flour. So once again, the front whispers simplicity while the back reveals a more processed product. This happens over and over in this aisle. The bag looks like a staple. The ingredient line tells you the staple has been whitened, refined, and then nutritionally adjusted afterward. If that trade-off doesn't bother you, fine. But if you came into the aisle believing older-looking brands are automatically cleaner, Martha White is one more reminder that packaging tone is not ingredient truth. Pause on that for a second, because the pattern is already obvious. The first mistake shoppers make is assuming flour is too basic to be engineered into tiers of trust. But it absolutely is. The second mistake is thinking all-purpose means neutral. It doesn't. All-purpose just means the flour is meant to function broadly. It says nothing about how it got there. Bleached can still be all-purpose. Enriched can still be all-purpose. Highly familiar can still be all-purpose. That label solves a baking problem. It does not solve a transparency problem. Now let's get into the bags that people buy because they think they're choosing value. Brand number 5 is Great Value All-Purpose Flour, the common enriched bleached version. This is the budget autopilot choice. And to be fair, this is where a lot of real families live. Not everyone has the luxury of treating flour like a boutique ingredient. But even here, the reason I would avoid it if I had options is straightforward. When the category is already built around a simple raw material, going cheap often means accepting the most industrialized, least distinguished version of that raw material. Great Value's common all-purpose bag is bleached and enriched. So the savings are not coming from magical efficiency. They are often coming from standardization, commodity sourcing, and the lowest friction version of what flour can be. If you bake once a year, maybe you won't care. If flour lives in your kitchen all the time, I think you should care more than the price tag encourages you to. The sixth bag I would leave behind is Baker's Corner All-Purpose Flour from Aldi. This one is interesting because Aldi shoppers are often more intentional than people give them credit for. They are not just chasing cheapness. They are trying to beat the system. They want smart value. They want the private label version that secretly performs just as well. And sometimes that instinct works. But with flour, you still have to read past the price advantage. Baker's Corner All-Purpose Flour is another enriched bleached wheat flour. So yes, you may be saving money. But you are not stepping into some hidden premium lane. You are still buying into the same processing pattern you saw in the big national brands. This is where the aisle stops being about brand loyalty and starts becoming a lesson in repetition. Different bag, different shelf, same compromise. Seventh is Signature Select All-Purpose Flour. This is the kind of product shoppers almost never form strong opinions about because it's just there. It fills the space. It rides on the store's name. You toss it into the cart because it feels generic in the harmless sense. But generic is exactly where oversight gets lazy. The Signature Select All-Purpose Bag is another pre-sifted, enriched, bleached flour. And pre-sifted is one of those phrases that sounds like care, but often functions like reassurance theater. It suggests convenience, not quality. It makes the bag feel prepared, ready, bakery adjacent. But when you strip away the wording, you still have a standard refined commodity flour dressed up as a practical default. If you are shopping on autopilot, this bag wins. If you are shopping for the safest, clearest choice, it loses quickly. Eighth is Hill Country Fare All-Purpose Flour. Same story, different region. This is another value flour lane where the bag says all-purpose and the reality is enriched and bleached. And this is where I want to slow down, because shoppers often tell themselves a very understandable lie. It's just flour. How different can it really be? That sentence is why this aisle gets away with so much sameness. The differences are not always dramatic in one recipe. They show up in what your standards become over time. If every kitchen staple gets selected on familiarity, price, and front label calm, then you quietly train yourself to stop asking how much unnecessary processing you're willing to normalize in foods that could be simpler. Ninth is Hudson Cream, specifically the classic bleached short patent version that still has a lot of regional loyalty behind it. This is a perfect example of a flour that carries almost mythic trust in certain households. People talk about texture, they talk about tenderness, they talk about results. And again, that performance story is real to the people who use it. But performance can distract from the bigger shopper question: what exactly am I rewarding here? Hudson Cream's classic version is a bleached wheat flour with enrichment and added enzyme support for baking performance. So the bag isn't really saying, here is flour in the most straightforward sense. It's saying, here is a flour built to deliver a certain effect. If effect is your only concern, you may love it. If your concern is ingredient simplicity and lower intervention processing, it should not be your first choice. Now we get to the 10th bag, and this one is where some people will disagree with me. Heckers. Compared with the heavily bleached bags, Heckers looks better on first inspection, and in some ways it is better. It leans into an unbleached image and has a stronger, more old mill kind of reputation. So why would I still put it in the avoid column for this particular video? Because once I move past the absolute bottom tier of this aisle, my standards go up. If I'm paying more attention, I want more than not the worst. I want stronger clarity around how the flour is positioned, how transparent the brand is about what makes it preferable, and whether it is actually delivering a cleaner lane than the mainstream crowd. Heckers can be a step up from the most processed bargain bags, but if the mission is to identify the safest, most confidence-inspiring options, it still doesn't beat the three I'm about to show you. And this is the point where most shoppers feel a little annoyed, because the easy bags are gone. The familiar bags are gone. The nostalgic bags are gone. The cheap bags are gone. The private label shortcuts are gone. You have walked halfway down the aisle and discovered that the section is not split between good flour and bad flour. It is split between flour that asks almost nothing from you and flour that asks you to actually choose a standard. Here's the simplest standard I use. In this aisle, genuinely safe does not mean magical, perfect, or medically guaranteed. It means the bag checks more of the right boxes with fewer trust gaps. I want unbleached. I want clear no bromate language if I can get it. I prefer organic when possible because it narrows the sourcing question and usually comes with a cleaner overall positioning. I like fewer add-backs and less industrial correction. And above all, I want a brand that seems eager to tell me why its flour is different instead of hoping I never look closely in the first place. That brings us to the first genuinely safer pick, and for a lot of shoppers, the most practical one: King Arthur. Not every King Arthur product is the same, but as a brand, this is one of the clearest relief points in the aisle. Their regular unbleached all-purpose flour is explicitly unbleached and unbromated, and the brand leans into consistency, wheat quality, and stricter internal specifications instead of pretending flour is just anonymous dust in a bag. If you want the cleaner everyday upgrade that still feels realistic for mainstream grocery shopping, King Arthur is the one most people can act on immediately. And if you want the stronger version of that choice, King Arthur Organic All-Purpose Flour is even better. It is milled from organic wheat, it is unenriched, and the entire buying experience feels like the opposite of being managed through nostalgia. You are not buying an emotional story. You are buying clarity. Notice how different that feels when the bag is in your hands. The color is often a little creamier, the branding feels more direct, the product story feels more earned. Instead of trying to disappear into, "this is just how flour is," it makes a case for why this flour was handled differently. That is what real trust looks like in a basic staple. Not louder claims, better specifics. The second genuinely safer pick is Bob's Red Mill Organic All-Purpose Unbleached White Flour. This is another brand that tends to attract people who are already looking past the center-of-the-aisle default mindset. And, with good reason. Bob's Red Mill explicitly describes this flour as unbleached and unenriched, and it even states that there is no potassium bromate added. That matters because the brand is not forcing you to infer the standard. It is telling you the standard. The bag does not rely on a grandmother fantasy or a bargain reflex. It relies on the consumer noticing that the flour is simpler, more direct, and easier to defend. If you are the kind of shopper who reads labels because you do not want to be quietly upsold into lower standards, Bob's Red Mill feels like one of the most honest conversations you can have in this aisle. There is also something psychologically useful about brands like this. They retrain your eye. Once you buy a flour that is upfront about being unbleached, upfront about not using bromate, and not hiding behind the word all-purpose like that explains everything, the older bags start looking strangely vague. You realize how many products were benefiting from your low expectations. The third genuinely safer pick is Central Milling, especially its organic all-purpose lane like Beehive Organic All-Purpose Flour. This is not always the easiest bag to find, and that's part of the problem with the flour aisle in general. The safer, more transparent choices are often less aggressively distributed than the legacy commodity bags. But Central Milling earns its place here because the brand's own flour guidance is unusually clear. Its organic flour is non-GMO by definition of the organic standard, and the company states plainly that none of its flour is bromated. That is the kind of directness I want from a brand selling a staple. Not a wink, not a heritage mood board, not a vague premium quality line. A direct answer. If you can get Central Milling at a grocery store, specialty market, or through a reliable source, it belongs on the shortlist. Now here's the part a lot of people miss. The real value of finding those three brands is not just switching one bag for another. It is learning how to walk this aisle differently forever. Because the flour aisle is really a test. Do you buy the bag that feels most familiar, or do you buy the bag that gives you the fewest unanswered questions? Do you reward branding inertia, or do you reward transparency? Do you settle for probably fine, or do you move toward, I know why I chose this? Let's make that practical. If you are standing in front of a wall of flour and you only have 10 seconds, start with one question. Is it bleached? If yes, that is the easiest first filter. Unless you have a specific baking reason, and you know exactly why you want that effect, I would move on. Second question. Is it enriched? Enrichment is not automatically evil, but if the flour has been processed enough that nutrients are being added back in, you should at least recognize that you are no longer in the simplest possible version of the product. Third question. Does the brand tell you anything meaningful about bromate, sourcing, organic status, or why this flour deserves trust? If the bag is all vibes and no substance, that is information too. And here's a small but important reset in the middle of all this. A safer flour does not give you permission to stop thinking entirely. Raw flour is still raw flour. Brands themselves often remind buyers not to treat flour as ready to eat. So this is not about one magic bag that removes all responsibility. It is about reducing the number of compromises you accept before the baking even begins. That is a completely different mindset from fear. It is just standard raising. There is also a money lesson here. People assume safer automatically means irrationally expensive, but that is not always true when you zoom out. Flour is not something most households burn through at the speed of snack foods. The price jump from a highly processed bargain bag to a better bag often looks dramatic only because the base product is so cheap to begin with. But when you break it down across loaves, batches, and months, the difference can be smaller than the trust upgrade is worth. And if you do bake a lot, that may be even more reason to buy the bag you feel better about, not less. Frequency makes quality more relevant, not less. Another thing I want to point out is how often people confuse baking outcomes with product integrity. They'll say, "My biscuits came out great," or "My cake always works with this brand," as if that ends the conversation. It doesn't. A product can perform and still be more processed, less transparent, or less aligned with your standards than an alternative. You don't have to choose between good baking and smarter shopping, but you do have to stop treating familiarity as proof. So if we walk back through the aisle one last time, the pattern becomes easy to see. Pillsbury, Gold Medal Standard Bleached Bag. White Lily, Martha White, Great Values Common Bleached Bag. Baker's Corner, Signature Select, Hill Country Fare, Hudson Cream's Classic Bleached Version, and even a brand like Hecker's if your standard is truly high. These are all examples of how American flour can look simpler than it really is. Some rely on bleaching, some rely on enrichment, Some rely on regional affection, some rely on budget autopilot. Some are better than others, but none of them are the 3 bags I would feel best recommending to someone who wants the safest and most transparent lane. And the 3 I would move toward are clear. King Arthur, especially the organic all-purpose option if you can get it. Bob's Red Mill Organic All-Purpose Unbleached White Flour, and Central Milling's Organic All-Purpose line. Those are not the only decent flours on earth, but they are the 3 that most clearly break out of the most common problems in this category and give you a stronger reason to trust what you are bringing home. The bigger truth here is not just about flour. It is about how grocery shopping works now. The more basic the product looks, the less people inspect it. And the less people inspect it, the easier it becomes for brands to sell processing as tradition, correction as normal, and ambiguity as comfort. You thought you were making the most straightforward purchase in the aisle. That is exactly why this matters. Because if even flour can be sold through confusion, then every simple staple in your pantry deserves a second look. So the next time you buy flour, remember one rule: don't shop the front of the bag. Shop the trust gap. If the flour is bleached, enriched, vague, or coasting on familiarity alone, keep moving. If the brand is direct about being unbleached, unbromated, organic, or clearly higher standard in how it handles the grain, now you're finally comparing the right things. If you've got one of these bags in your kitchen right now, I want to know which one it is and why you bought it. And if you swear by a brand I didn't mention, especially a regional flour people overlook, drop it in the comments, because the fastest way to make everyone a smarter shopper is to compare what actually earns trust once the marketing gets out of the way.